Charles, a few days ago, you and I were chatting, and you were telling me about this music festival that you were at and how it seemed like nothing really has changed in terms of the people that go there from, let's say, 20 years ago. And the funny thing is I can relate because I remember in the late 90s, early 2000s going to music festivals. Today, they're largely dead for whatever reason. But when I have been in recent times, the kinds of people seem to be precisely the same.
Yeah, well, I dare say that is the situation across the festival spectrum. I mean, specifically, we have recently returned from the Hope Freedom Festival, and that's the distinction to make, I think, between what would be regarded or what would label itself as a music festival versus what we were at, which is specifically calling itself a freedom festival. But the conversation that you and I had earlier in the week was the sort of overlap between the two. As far as I've seen so far, what are called freedom festivals in the UK you seem to use a similar template from sort of smaller scale conventional music festivals, and I just find it interesting. I just thought it'd be a good talking point, because on the one hand, let's say within the Freedom Festival setup, if you're going to go to that, if you're going to participate either as a performer, so you could be a musician, or you could have a stall there, or you could do what we did, which was to go and talk in the talk tent and have your audience. You know that the people who've turned up to the festival are by and large going to be interested in the same subjects as you. They want to be listening to your sorts of presentations, but in a way that suggests they probably agree with the line that's going to be taken. So that there's that feeling of security within the environment, both on the side of the performer or stallholder, but also critically the people that actually go there. They, we always talk about sort of being around like-minded people and all that kind of thing. The same is by and large probably still the case for, say, just a music festival of, say, sort of small to medium size. People are, maybe ideologically on similar ground. I mean, I am guessing slightly here. I'm out of touch to an extent with that side of it. But I think it was for me. It's just interesting that there absolutely is overlap between the way these things run, and I suppose the question is, first of all, in a way, why is that? There are other ways of making events work and drawing people in, but also, what do we think about the fact that, by and large, the people that do go to, say, freedom festivals, because I think that's the bit that we want to concentrate on, are broadly
freedom.
Well, yeah, the same sort of people, and it's that sort of two sides of the same coin. But by creating that kind of environment, which means that it's going to be really, really fantastic, really friendly, because everybody is sharing to a certain extent some sort of belief structure. That's great, but at the same time, what it means is that there's a great deal of self-limiting, because the message, such as it is, doesn't actually ever get out beyond those confines. And I just find that a sort of interesting, almost paradox, really. It was something that I just mentioned as a thought when we spoke earlier in the week, which is not to say, I'm not in any way, this is not to say, the Freedom Festival's got it all wrong, or music festivals got it all wrong, or anything's necessarily got it all wrong. But it's just kind of interesting, the idea that with say freedom in mind, and therefore wanting to change what we regard as a restrictive status quo, that in actual fact the ability to do that within this environment is really compromised, or actually that there isn't any ability to do that. So what happens afterwards? What do people go away and do? And going back to what you were saying, the people, say, for the last couple of decades, can one plot a course that intersects with these sorts of events and see that they have been points along the way at which people have been galvanized into action? Or do we run the risk of sort of meeting up and realizing that actually not a huge amount has changed? I don't know. What do you think?
I'll just jump in here if I can. My observation on this, Jerm, is that the numbers at the two Freedom Festivals that we went to this year, which was Sounds Beautiful and the Hope Freedom Festival, were significantly lower this year than last year. So even among the community that would be the natural audience for that type of event, there's been, and particularly bearing in mind that this has been a spectacular, from a sort of events point of view, this has been a spectacularly good summer in the UK. That still didn't get people out to go to these things. So there's something going on within the freedom community at the moment, which is moving them away from attending these types of events. I think that there are what might be described as mainstream festivals around the place that offer opportunities. And Charles, you're going to have to help me out. The festival that was the week before the Hope Festival held in Exeter.
In
Do you
Exeter.
remember? Yeah.
Well, I'm now confused because I thought you said it was Beautiful Sounds, but
yeah, no, that's completely wrong.
Yeah, that's way too much.
Sorry, I've forgotten the name of it off the top of my head, and they, although it is a mainstream event, relatively speaking, they had a rebel tent, which was quite a bit away from the
Beautiful Days.
Beautiful Days, thank you. Yes, Beautiful Days. I knew it was beautiful something. So they had a rebel tent, what they called a rebel tent, which is, and they have that every year, which is quite away from the sort of music stages and on the top of a hill. And it was actually quite well attended this year. And Patrick Henningsen was there, along with a guy called Tim Norman and Craig Murray, to talk about the so-called alleged Novichok poisonings, the Skripal affair in Salisbury, and this was a absolutely mainstream audience that had not come into contact with this type of information before, and the response was generally very good. So this again, I think, comes down to it's been a theme of the conversations that we've had since we began these discussions. It comes down to our willingness to engage with each other on one hand, but also to engage with people that don't sort of sit comfortably in the same kind of ideological space. And in this case, Patrick and Craig and Tim did go into that environment to pass on that message, but equally it would be good if people that consider themselves to be in the freedom space, in inverted commas, attended some other events just as members of the public and started talking to other people and sort of cross-pollinate ideas.
You said that there's something going on in the freedom movement. That right there is what I want to think about for a second here, because I do wonder what is going on. If this festival had occurred, let's say 3 years ago, let's say 4 years ago, 2021 maybe, I think the attendance of something like that would have been way greater.
That's absolutely true. I think there's actually quite a demoralization within what might be categorized as the so-called freedom movement particularly in the last 2 years, and in the last year. And a theme that I'm hearing often from people now is, I have switched off from the news completely, or from current affairs completely, or from anything that's going on. I can't handle it. And this is to a certain extent a dangerous state of affairs, because good people therefore are not engaged in events and in trying to resist events. Although perhaps you could argue that completely removing yourself from the situation is some form of resistance. But the truth is, you can't remove yourself from any situation because the situation's there, no matter whether you're engaged with it or not. And so if things have got to the stage where individuals aren't able to handle events and therefore they're trying to withdraw, well, unfortunately, that isn't actually going to work at the end of the day. So I think that's part of it. Is certainly a rejection of everything at the moment, and that's, I don't really know what the answer to that is or what the scale of it is, but that seems to be part of the story. What else is going on? I'm not really sure.
I think it's very hard to know, isn't it? Because certainly from a UK column perspective, because of the way in which we conduct our business or our relationship with the membership, with the viewership, with the public, and what is going on, we are, of course, only able to deal with the information that we do have. So when people do appear to withdraw or they do not maintain contact either with us or with any of the things you're talking about, we can infer certain things from that, but ultimately we have absolutely no idea what it means that those people are doing. And when we go back to the idea that we were talking about, I think it was last week, in relation to getting organised, organising oneself, organising one's community, if people are putting all of that to one side because they have, after a certain period of time, got the information that they think they require in order to make the changes that they want to make to their life, and that then becomes the focus, and therefore that necessarily means switching off all the other things that might be considered either a distraction or sort of not necessarily expedient to what they're doing, then I can understand that. But the thing is, we have no way of demonstrating that is the case. I mean, I would remain hopeful that it is, and that for the sake of argument, let's say that people are dedicating themselves to forming more relevant and stronger sort of community ties, that they are pursuing ways in which that they can source their own food, that they're putting effort into, if they've got children, into sort of considering how to educate in a different way, all those kinds of things. And I think if you are doing that, that is really that is a very, very involved process, and I can see exactly why that would mean people would first of all switch off, and also if they had, I mean, I am putting a positive spin on this, but if they had previously attended what we describe as freedom festivals and found that kind of engagement with people there had been really inspiring and had led them to go off and do what they do, I can see that they would step back and feel that there was no need necessarily to go back and sort of revisit that same environment until such point that they felt they were completely on top of it, and they'd go back in to say, it's all working and whatever. I mean, I don't know, but going back, because you cited, Jerm, you just said 2021, and the thing is, at the moment, yes, of course, I mean, UK Column's been going for as good as 20 years now. So yes, people are at many, many different stages along the way, but I think there's still it doesn't matter where people began. I think there's no getting away from the fact that the seismic change in 2020 in particular has absolutely shocked people's sort of life systems in a way that nothing previously did, because any of the things that people had been engaged with prior to that didn't actually have to affect the way they live their lives. Whereas 2020, bang, didn't really matter where you were in the world. In some way, the way that you wanted to live was affected. That means that to a degree, we're all on the same, we're all sort of marching to the same time in a sense. And I wonder if that has something to do with it, whether the first couple of years were sort of a startled period of information gathering, or, as we have identified, people thinking, yeah, this is absolutely terrible. And then by the end of, whenever it was, the end of 2022, when it sort of ran out of puff, it was deliberately deflated so that people didn't have anything to rail against. A lot of people, of course, just thought, well, okay, that's done now. I'll just go back to my normal life as it was before. I avoided being incarcerated. I avoided being injected with something possibly deadly. and that's that. So I wonder whether, to an extent, we are seeing just an expression of the passing of time that happens to have people in similar places along that sort of progression. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, Celia Farber was on my show a few nights ago, and she said that the I hate the term controlled opposition, but that tends to also be a thing. Whenever something big like COVID occurs or similar, you will find an infiltration into, shall we say, the opposing side to make it either completely demoralized or broken or just full of infighting. And so the official position holds. And I think she's right. And I wonder if some of this has been happening, because it doesn't matter what you're shaking your head there, Mike.
No, I'm just going to say it's not a question of wonder. It's absolutely demonstrable. And it's particularly, I mean, it's much worse in the last couple of years. But I think the organization that I've cited in the past is the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, who claim to have something around 50,000 influencers on their books. Right? We are this I suspect is a very big part of the reason people are tuning out at the moment. And I'm not quite as optimistic as Charles about whether people are tuning out because they're busy doing making other changes, positive changes in their lives. I think a lot of it is to do with exactly this. It's because as Patrick said this during our I think it was during Extra on Monday's Extra when we were recording at the festival, that World War III has already begun, and of course it's begun as an information war primarily, as far as we're concerned. There's other kinetic wars going on in other parts of the world, but as far as we're concerned, it's an information war at the moment, and everything is effectively being weaponized. So we have YouTube, a platform which, as we all know, was originally set up to allow ordinary people the opportunity to talk about ordinary things. And as that has developed, it has become more and more professional, in inverted commas. And particularly in the last couple of years, we're seeing so-called influencers being employed by NGOs like the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, but also directly from central government to pump out narratives on one hand, to disrupt conversations in the comments sections on the other hand, to just bring as much chaos as possible into the conversation. In one of the goals of this is undoubtedly to demoralize and cause people to walk away from what's going on and stop being active in this. So I don't think it's there's no doubt that this is going on. It's absolutely verifiable and demonstrable. It's not a question. There's no question around it at all. That was why I was shaking my head.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen exactly that. If I have any, like Lucilia, right, who was on my show, she'll have an incredible conversation with me, and at some point she'll talk about the virus. Now, suddenly you'll see comments going, viruses don't exist. I stopped listening when she said that. Okay, so now what? I mean, they've completely missed the entire conversation, Mike.
Oh, look! This is something that really winds me up. I really despise this attitude. I mean, there's not much that I really hate in the world, but the attitude that because somebody has said one thing that I disagree with, that I'm going to tune out of everything they say. This is just wrong. Also, we've just talked about the fact, and it is a fact, that there are people being paid and employed to push certain narratives and whatnot. But the fact of the matter is, and I realize how hard it is to sort of make these judgments, but we should not be by default saying that because somebody says one thing that they're a limited hangout or that they're some kind of controlled opposition. We should be listening to what people are saying, and we should be rejecting the things we disagree with, but we should actually be considering the things. We shouldn't just reject anything out of hand either, by the way. We should actually consider it. And I've said this before in these discussions, we should be challenging our own positions and our own ideology as just as strongly as we're challenging anybody else's. That is how we come to a conclusion about what's going on in the world. It's not just about rejecting everything that somebody says because of one point that I disagree with at this moment in time, because next week or next month or next year, actually my opinion may have changed.
I mean, it drives me up the wall too, Mike. Like, a guest will talk about something being global, and then there's a comment, Earth is flat. I mean, it's just insane. And I see this all the time. And it's something that it just makes you want to just block them, like, because they're not adding any value. It's just destructive. It's not constructive. It doesn't help any type of critical thinking at all.
Well, that's absolutely right. You throw a comment in there like that, and it is not constructive. It's not helping. I completely agree. I would love to see every comment that's posted in our chat box or in the comments under any of the content that we provide to be considered, rather than just throwing out these sort of tropes and yeah.
Well, I think.
Sorry, Charles. You should jump in at this point.
People really won't want to hear is that I regard that quality, if we call it a quality, of immediately saying, "Oh well, that's it. That they've done it for me because they said that one thing, or they didn't say that one thing, or whichever way it is." And that therefore there is a default response to condition yourself totally against them. That's the BBC for you. That is what the BBC has done to people. And look at it the other way around. Try inserting mild anthropogenic climate change skepticism into a conversation about anything else, and see how that's
you're a denier, Charles. You're a climate change denier.
Yeah, exactly. So all the things that the BBC chucks out, whether it's to do with Andrew Tate or something on gender or whatever, it's just the other side of that, exactly that same coin. I'm afraid this is precisely what in particular, most obviously, the British government. I mean, this is not exclusive to the United Kingdom, of course, but the British government and the BBC in particular absolutely do that. They condition people to reject anything that somebody has to say if they've said that one thing, or conversely to accept if they haven't, whichever way around. So I'm afraid to say I do absolutely echo your views. I mean, I'm not suggesting I don't get wound up by it. I'm just incredulous. I'm amazed that people would do it on the one hand, and also slightly bemused that I see that as a absolute mainstream conditioning response. And again, if people think that's having a dig, I'm not obviously having a personal dig. It's just that's the way it seems to. That's the way where it seems to have come from. And actually, sorry, just on that, because it's been annoying me for a whole week. Towards the end of last week's recording, Jerm, you made some remark about wanting to punch a wall every time that somebody said something in relation to carbon credits with Angus McIntosh's farm. My first comment would be, why waste energy punching only a wall? But the second thing I was going to say was that is absolutely case in point. But this is deliberate. Carbon credits is such a good example. Angus talks about putting carbon into the soil. He's not talking about carbon dioxide. It is no accident that people talk about a carbon footprint rather than a carbon dioxide footprint. They are two different things. And people absolutely, on both sides of the argument, if we're going to call it that, I mean, again, I'm creating a false binary there, suggesting that it is one or the other. But the point is that is absolutely typical of it. The moment somebody says carbon something, it's right. Oh, well, yeah, that's it. I've had it. I've absolutely had it with them. Doesn't matter what they say, or indeed the fact that without carbon, or indeed, of course, carbon dioxide, we'd all be dead. So yes, sorry, I just wanted to get that in. It's been a week, and every so often it just comes back into my brain, and I was so cross with myself for forgetting to mention it last week.
No, but that's a good point.
Yeah.
No, it's a good point, because I mean, without going into the discussion, carbon it's essential to life. So by putting it into the soil is a good thing. There's nothing that should trigger you about that. Me wanting to punch the wall is just that I get so, like Mike, I get so frustrated at the fact that we go through so much effort to put quality into these discussions and to chatting and really trying to spread ideas, that are good ideas. And then you get these trolls who, I get it. You shouldn't worry about them. But sometimes, Charles, sometimes I'm just human.
Yeah, no, you are. I mean, specifically what I mean, I suppose I shouldn't really be advocating for violence against the person, perhaps this early on in the recording, and I guess I'm not really. but I think, the more serious point is people sort of expending energy in a pointless way, and Arnold Schwarzenegger, we have to blame for that. And look what he said in 2020 about whatever he said, stuff your freedom. If it weren't for him, people wouldn't go and express their pent up energy in such a pointless way. And I know this sounds overcritical, but to go and expend energy in a gym is amazing. I mean, it'd be like filling up your car with fuel and do what they try to do in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and they're trying to take the miles back off the clock, and you're just putting it on a thing and just letting it run and nothing. What's the result? Sorry, it's a bit of a sidebar, but I mean, but I think it just speaks volumes about the society within which we live. What practical skills do we have that our parents didn't have? Probably none, except we can do more stuff on computers.
You're our resident fitter. Marcus Aurelius, Charles.
Is that good?
bring some stoicism. That's
well, no. Anyway, sorry. It's just, but I think it's a point worth making, because so much of what we do now has a zero. The result is zero. You think, whether it is sort of physical fitness or preparation or whatever, but I mean, how does that actually convert into anything useful? And I think it's as much a mental thing as a physical thing. So sorry to I mean, the gym thing is a slightly pointless thing to say, but I don't think it is. I mean, just think of what people could physically do if they use that energy doing what the Amish do, for example, just helping each other to build barns, build houses, or whatever. So it's a separate point, but I do think it's very much related to everything that we talk about all the time. If you're going to put on a festival, a music festival, or a freedom festival, or like the Beautiful Days Festival, amazing discourse, but how do you capture that and then actually make something of it? How does a result come from that? And I think that's how much more stuff should be viewed, which is exactly why getting triggered by a reference to carbon, for example, is such a problem. It really, rather than considering the obstacles on the course, why not think more about the good stuff and how you use that? So yes, I do think all of this is very much related.
Just to a couple of points there, just to clarify something. I'm absolutely going to reject any notion that I sit and get frustrated by these kinds of comments and think about them constantly. I see those types of comments in the chat box, and yes, I usually swear inwardly or something to myself, but that's it done. Then there's no. I'm not going to waste a millisecond actually thinking about that from that point forward. The thing that sort of is difficult about it is that of course the comments like that, not only are they indicative of someone who is demoralized themselves, but they demoralize other people. So you're actually helping the state by posting stuff like that, and that is something that I think needs to be said. But for the festivals themselves, Charles, I would love, hope went some way to it, I suppose, because they had, art sessions by Jake Fern and so on, and other stuff. But I would actually, the thing that I thought that was missing, that I think is missing absolutely from the freedom festivals that we've been to, is the practical skills training side of things. That's just, if I were running an event like that, yes, the music should be on from the evenings or whatever, but let's get some people that actually know how to do things to run training on various topics, whether that's community building or self growing your own food or whatever it happens to be. There isn't enough of that kind of activity in these events, as far as I can see so far, and I think that would be a great step forward.
I totally agree, and I think that goes back to the idea of cross-pollination. I mean, given my lifestyle, the type of festival I'm much more likely to go to is an agricultural show or something related to that. But that is where those things do excel, because almost always you will have some sort of demonstration, either something that's just a little stall that you go up to where somebody is doing something, whether it's a blacksmith at work or a cooper or somebody who has a practical skill. And I'm not suggesting that therefore we all need sort of rural skills that we're never going to be able to use, but you just never know who might be inspired to do what, or what linkage you might find with that particular person or with other people that are watching it that are drawn towards it. So I think that is absolutely a thing. But also this is where there are points of crossover, because whether or not you're aware of the full story on the Skripals, or whether or not you think that carbon or carbon dioxide is a big problem, you can be in agreement with somebody that you want to eat something that is good for you and that you don't want a government that is oppressive. And so I think as a way of bringing in this element of presenting people of perhaps differing points of view with these points of convergence, I think is a really important one. It seems like from what Patrick has reported back that the Beautiful Days event did do that to a certain degree. But although I would think that you would be absolutely right that I would have doubted there would be anything that would be akin to sort of learning something that is in effect a practical skill. But I think that I totally agree, and I think this is where, not just in the festival context, but in life, and I know we've talked about this quite a lot before, but practical skills are in really short supply, and they're an excellent way of bringing people together in a sort of genuine fashion. I mean, because people feel that they are actually doing something useful. And I think going back to the sort of 2020 thereafter thing of where have people gone now, I think a lot of people, yes, I agree. I was speculating, but my sort of positive bent in terms of speculation was, well, perhaps people are going away and learning something. I think absolutely we have to recognise that for a lot of people, it's just been far too much doom and gloom, and they've felt that the whole thing is hopeless, and that's that, which is why they haven't resurfaced and they haven't learned the sorts of things that are going to enable them to change their lives and indeed be further outside of that element of whether it be state or corporate control. So yeah, I think this is a really important issue, and I think this is in fact about something that we should talk about with a view to next year and what we can start thinking about doing about that.
I wonder if it's just big events or as Matthias Desmet would say, sort of free-floating anxiety, which can be amplified by big events that capture, in a way, people to aggregate or congregate around, let's say, festivals or other type of ways of thinking. But when nothing really major is going on, they kind of just, dissipate and go back into how they were.
Jerm, are you saying that there's nothing major going on?
Well, there's always something major going on, but
no,
it's levels.
I think that's a
it's
very
levels,
good point.
Mike. It's levels.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I think this probably this does get to the heart of it. I think for an awful lot of people, they can't decide what it is that is going on because there are so many different things, and there's not one thing that's head and shoulders above anything else, and therefore there's not one sort of agenda item around which people can coalesce. And that is a problem. And that goes back to exactly what we've described and what people have absolutely recognised, which was how when the COVID tyranny rug was pulled from under people, they were completely left floundering because the sorts of things that had been, let's say, predicted or projected, like digital identity and central bank digital currency, yes, of course, those are still ongoing items, but they haven't yet, in most places, they haven't yet come to pass. And then it meant that people's sort of get up and go was taken away from them. It was then too difficult. And I think this is, again, absolutely part and parcel of the way in which the news cycle, in particular by the mainstream, is managed. Nothing dominates for a long enough period for people to really get stuck into it.
Charles, I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this, because I have to admit to feeling a certain sense of failure, because whenever the COVID thing finished, we were absolutely talking about what was coming next. We were talking about the fact that the certain people were using the term polycrisis, that we were going to be bombarded with multiple events, which were going to make it very hard to know which way was up, and somehow people, despite the fact that was being expressed, people weren't prepared for it. I think in many ways. And part of the reason that the people are turning off was because they didn't recognize what was coming next and see that as the next stage of the same agenda, and that they didn't separate themselves from it. Therefore, it has actually affected them. Do you see it the same way? Is this have we have I don't mean us specifically, but have the commentators and the analysts failed to a certain degree in explaining that and giving people the sort of strength to resist?
It's a very good question, and I think it's one that it's hard to answer with any degree of certainty, not least because of the incredible array of perspectives that there'll be on that, on both sides. I would say what is absolutely observable on the commentator side of it is that people who were apparently aligned very much on what was going wrong between 2020 and 2022 have turned out to have either small or, in fact, quite large differences of opinion on a lot of what has happened since. And I think there's been a great tendency, because of the extreme focus of those 2 years, I think some people have been drawn into a position of thinking that there has to be similarly one thing that requires focus, which means that what you refer to in the polycrisis scenario, which I believe is absolutely a correct description, that is therefore to, in some ways, to willfully ignore all the other things or make them seem less significant in comparison to the one thing, or indeed there's no real consistent agreement on how the various things relate to each other or what the goals of those things might be. So I think it's I think perhaps overly harsh or overly critical to think that those commentating have necessarily failed. I think it depends what sort of feedback they are getting from, first of all, their audiences or from the people that are around them. So without wanting to sort of dodge a specific answer to the question totally, I do think it's really hard to say, and we do see this with our audiences. I thought yesterday was actually Wednesday's news was kind of case in point. What I spoke about at the start of the program was basically the sort of confection of a response of national fervour to the political topic of what's being described as mass deportation. And my feeling on it is that people have made their minds up about what they think of it, what's right, and this, that, and the other, and that to a large extent, people don't really want to hear the potential pitfalls, and the specific one I was describing was a campaign that seems completely innocent, which is to fly the flags of the Union flag or St George's Cross, sort of anywhere and everywhere in England, with which one would hope that there was absolutely no issue. Why on earth should there be? But the reason that it, to me, sticks out as being a potential trap is that, first of all, look how flags have been used over the last 5 years. We had the NHS sort of rainbow flag, the Black Lives Matter flag, the transgender Pride Progress flag, the Ukraine flag, the Palestine flag. So it's as though if flags are absolutely used in a way to sort of capture and manipulate people's minds, to say that a flag that already exists for this country could do that perhaps is a bit of a stretch. But what I meant by it was that it's very easy to see how people are being pushed into a position of not just putting the flag up in its own right because they're proud to be British or whatever it is. It's in reaction to something else. So tearing down a Ukraine flag and putting that up, or tearing down a Palestine flag and putting that up. And that is where you get into slightly dangerous territory, because then your focus is against somebody else rather than just for being British. And it's the being against something that is absolutely weaponized every time and turned into a drama, and then we get into scraps with the police and blah blah, and then focus against, in particular, the Islamic communities that are across the United Kingdom and blah blah blah. So that, I think, is a good example of part of this idea of polycrisis. But I go back to this point where people have their own views on it, and they don't want to consider the idea that that there's sort of anything wrong with it, even if subsequently it turns out that actually this whole thing does get subverted, manipulated, twisted, as I'm afraid to say I think it is likely to do. So
I would say it already has been, Charles.
Well, yes.
And the danger here, I think, is that it was clear to people during lockdown that the enemy was the state itself. Because the enemy that the state was telling people that they should be afraid of was something that was invisible. The enemy that the state is effectively telling people to be afraid of through various convoluted means at the moment is not invisible. It's there because it's got brown skin, or it's whatever. It's there. It's obvious. It's in people's faces. It's living in hotels. So that is something which is physical and is there and can be seen, and it's right in front of them. And because, or at least partly because of that difference, the idea that it's not the brown-skinned person but the state which is attacking them is one which they seem to have forgotten, at least the possibility that it's the state that is attacking them, that is the real enemy here, is something that they've forgotten. Other things that people have forgotten is that if we look back at, the Arab Spring or the Maidan or a whole bunch of these other so-called grassroots revolutionary movements that have happened in other countries, we have been willing to acknowledge that those, to a greater or lesser extent, have been manipulated events, and yet we're not prepared to acknowledge that something which is happening in our shores is a manipulated event. And part of this might be because it's people perceive the people living in hotels as an easier target than the state, because the state's a big thing, it's a hard thing, and it's difficult to fight against that. But I think that what is perhaps regrettable is that people are being drawn along on the crest of a wave on this thing, and they're not stopping to consider the implications of where this ends up. And we have been trying to make the point for many, many years now that if there is significant civil unrest in this country, this is where we're talking about, but in any of our countries, that the state is just sitting there waiting in the wings to step in and deal with that. And we've been trying to make the point that whatever we saw in 2020, 2021, 2022 is really pretty light touch compared to what we're going to see if we end up in a war footing, no matter whether that's civil war or something abroad. And finally, to say it once again, because I think it just needs to be repeated and repeated and repeated, this country's military doctrine, which we have exported to Europe and the United States to some degree, but this country's military doctrine now is absolutely clear that the home theatre is no longer considered a safe place, that home is as much a theatre of operations as abroad is. And we've got to absolutely take this all into account before we're tearing down a flag to replace it with another flag. And just to deal with any criticism here, this does not mean that we should not be proud of our flag, right? Our flag, our country, these things should be things that we are proud of. We've got to remember when they are being weaponized against us. And this process, I said this on Wednesday's extra, but it's worth just saying again. This process began 40 or 50 years ago, whenever the mainstream media began pushing the narrative that somehow English people should be ashamed of the English flag, that the English flag had become a symbol of right-wing extremism, and that the only time that they were allowed to bring the English flag out was when England football team or England rugby team was taking part in some kind of international sport. That's when this fight should have been fought, and that's when the notion of the flag being something which symbolized or that was to be considered embarrassing should have been dealt with. And now we're in a position where that weaponization is coming to full fruition, and that, in my opinion, is really extremely dangerous, and we need to take a step back and consider this.
Yeah.
Well, reject the out on the streets narrative, and right. Look, how do I put this? A lot of years ago, whenever the issue of immigration was being discussed, Brian was in a meeting with the BNP, British National Party, and this was being discussed, and the issue of people coming into the country. There was a bit of pushback from the audience, and somebody said something about immigration, and Brian made the point, well, how did they get in? Did they fight their way ashore? Now, that at that time was something that just wasn't happening. Of course, now we have suddenly been getting lots of footage from mainstream press of people apparently doing something like that. And of course, we've got this idea that we should have mass deportations now, which has originated in the United States. Starmer's just done a deal with the French, which says that if 100 people fight their way ashore, as it were, that those people are going to be removed from the country and they're going to be replaced with 100 other people that the French have decided are good people and need to come into Britain. And I'm not seeing any pushback against that. I'm seeing pushback against the people that are in the hotels. I'm seeing demonstrations outside the hotels and people, commenting on that situation. But the policy that the parliamentary decision making, the government, I'm not seeing the angst being directed in that direction. And it seems to me that everybody's pointing at a symptom and they're not trying to deal with the disease. And bearing in mind what we've just gone through in the early part of this decade, I'm struggling to understand why people haven't been more equipped to reach the right conclusions on this. It might be, as I say, just because it's easier to target the relatively helpless people that are in hotels. We got to be targeting the right thing, and that is the state. So that's where I would start.
Absolutely.
The state and the stakeholders.
Well, who do you mean by stakeholders?
As Ian Davis, as Ian Davis would argue, the private companies that are aligned, the public-private partnerships. So not just the state.
Yeah, but it's the state. It's the state that controls the borders, Jerm, and the state has the borders absolutely wide open at the moment.
Yes. Yeah. Right? Okay. Right. I get what you're saying.
This is not the fault of the immigrant. This is the fault of the state. And if we end up fighting on the streets with immigrants, which is where we're going absolutely at this point in time, we are doing the state's job for it, because the state wants to close down this country and all opposition to what it's doing. This crisis is state generated, and we gotta focus on that, and we gotta focus on who the actual enemy is. Mm-hmm. And lots of people are pushing back at me and us for saying this, because we're just apologizing for Islam, or we're not. We're saying that problem is something that can only be dealt with on a level playing field. Let's say whenever people are full of rage, they're going to make the wrong decisions when it comes to how to deal with the problem. We've got to stop the problem getting worse first, and that lies with the state.
Yeah, I think also there are two separate things that are being willfully conflated. And I should say at the outset, I absolutely agree with. Of course, what on earth could be wrong with being proud to be British, or proud to be South African, or proud to be French, whatever? That shouldn't need saying, but somehow it does need saying in this climate. So, with that in mind, and again considering the fact that yes, the state is in charge of migration in every regard, but specifically the issue that has become such a flashpoint for everybody is in particular, the idea of sort of small boat crossings and exactly what Mike's just been talking about. Now, one thing that really sticks out as a point of conflation is this idea that, say, Islam is replacing Christianity, as though the story goes that Muslims are pushing Christians out of church and then taking over church buildings and making them mosques. That and the reason I prefix this with there's nothing wrong with being proud to be British. We go back to the question, which is, well, what is it that is British then? If you are complaining that there is not a British condition that is sufficiently strong to resist the sensation that another culture has pervaded and taken over, then why is that possible? And I can say with absolute authority that there is absolutely no way in which Muslims may push Christians out of churches and then take over church buildings. That is not possible. The only way in which that can happen is if church communities, church congregations have dwindled to such a point that the Church of England in particular has to go through the very, very expensive and laborious process of getting rid of that building as a church, at which point it can be turned into flats or turned into a shopping centre or turned into a mosque. But the first thing that has to happen is that people have to walk away from that church and abandon it. That's why it happens. And if we're to start flying flags and talk about the United Kingdom as a Christian country and all this sort of thing, well, then people have to mean it. So I know this sounds like sort of, campaign for just the church. And yes, there are many, many issues with the church. But again, that goes back to this idea of the right people supporting the right things. And I've got a conversation with Alex Thompson that would have come out yesterday on exactly this issue about, how in a way the Church of England has been allowed to go off the rails. I know it's a bit late in the conversation today to be opening up this sort of can of worms, but it does all point back to the same thing. And the problem is that in a way, this might sound overcritical, but you can't have it both ways. You can't say that you're proud to be British and want to have this idea of, Britain, the United Kingdom, England, whatever it is, as being a particular place, and then not actually behave like it. So how many of the people who are tearing down Palestine flags and putting up Union flags or St. George's crosses and effectively demonising Islam actually go to church? I mean, the only reason I'm using the church is because it's just such an obvious one, and it's such a well rehearsed line specifically about churches becoming mosques, but that cannot happen unless people voluntarily stop going to church, leave it, abandon it, at which point a community that does want to make use of it will do. So there are many, many problems with this, and I appreciate that to a certain extent this will create sort of sensitivities, and people might think that I'm kind of having a go at them. I'm not. What I'm asking for is for people to be consistent and also to consider how this idea of sort of patriotism or whatever it is can be weaponized, because in my book, if you are proud of being British or proud of your nation or whatever it is, that should stand in its own right. That doesn't mean to say that you are British and therefore you're against so and so, and that it's all to do with being opposed to other beliefs, other ideas, other cultures. That's an incredibly insecure position to try to hold. Why can't we simply have the secure position of thinking, well, we are British, we do have a functioning culture and society, and we know that will thrive and endure? And I think we know the answer to that, because unfortunately it's been picked apart, and we have fallen foul of all the various campaigns over, exactly like Mike says, over the last 50 years that have absolutely destabilised us. The only way to rectify that is to go back to start and start at ground level, get out of the gym and actually develop practical skills, do stuff that does rebuild from the ground up, family, community, and then we do have a proper British society.
Right, but look, this is sorry, I just want to jump in here because this is a vital point, Charles, because Brian was talking about the fact that at the Hope Festival during his presentation, he was talking about the fact that so many churches are now having to share a single vicar, and it's not just Church of England, it's all denominations that are having this problem, and part of the reason for that is there's been such a rejection of the church. But the church was a core part of community. It was a core part of what it was to be British. But the point I want to make here is this again comes back to who is the enemy. And what we have seen, the systematic destruction of the idea of Englishness, of Britishness, Scottishness, Welshness, whatever it is. We've seen the systematic destruction of what it is to be any of those things by the state propaganda machine for the last 60 years, right? And we have, to a large degree, fallen for it. Part of this is driven economically. Part of it's driven by the kind of so-called culture that that's pumped into our brains through the television. And so, as a result, the British nation, the English nation, the Welsh nation, the Scottish nation, they're weak. They have been weak. This has happened because we have been weak as a nation. I'm not talking about the state here, but as a nation, as a cohesive nation. And, you know, the fact that we have had immigration for the last 40 years should not have mattered two hoots if we had a strong cultural base and strength in our own communities and strength in our... But we allowed ourselves to be psychologically manipulated through propaganda over the last 40 or 50 years, to the point where the fact that we've had immigration into this country has made a significant difference to how this country is. And, you know, it always comes back to ourselves in a sense. But the point I'm trying to make here is, who is the enemy in all this, and where does our focus need to be when we're considering the changes that need to be made? You know, we've got to recognize what has been done to us.
That is actually a very powerful point on which to end our discussion. I don't think there's anything I can add to that. Charles, do you agree?
I agree that I would not want to add anything to it. No, I think that's exactly the right note to finish on. Brilliant.
All right, on that note, Charles, you're going to be away for a little bit, so the next few chats will be just you and me, Mike. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that too. There we go.
All right, guys, I'll catch you soon.